So here's a first model here. Going to make a very simple little rocket ship. And I'm going to start out here with a sphere. And again, notice the sphere drops right in the dead center of my world space with its center at 0, 0, 0. Once I've got my sphere, the first thing I'd like to do is I'm going to use my scale tool, scale it up. And notice that the scaling happens symmetrically on both sides. There is a way, if you don't want it to go both sides, there is a way to do that. You'll see that in a bit. So I'm going to start off making something that looks, the technical description would be cigar-shaped. That's the old description they used to use for UFOs. Call it a cucumber or cigar, whatever. Anyways, so there's our first start to that. I'm going to switch over here, press my selection tool, and now the next thing I'm going to do is add on a cylinder. Now, notice as soon as I click on the cylinder, that becomes my current object. It is selected, and it's deselected my sphere. Now, I'm going to take this cylinder, press R, resize it, and again scale that down a bit, and then W, and I'm going to move it down to the base here, right about there. That's good. I'm going to just pan up a bit and rotate so I can see this, and zoom in a little. Now what I'd like to do is I'm going to R, scale it in a bit, grab this green 2-dimension scale rectangle and bring it in just so the top edge of my disc or cylinder is just on the edge of my rocket. I'm not using object snaps or anything like that. I'm just kind of doing, well, that's good enough. Alright, so far what we've done is just manipulate objects using the manipulation tools. But now I want to change the shape of objects. I want to do some very basic sculpting. And in order to do that, switch back to my selection tool again, I'm going to have to change what it is exactly I am editing. So if I hover over my selected object, hold my right mouse button down, this will bring up my menu. So right now I am currently in object mode. And notice how the little center dot, I can move my pointer to each one of these to highlight it. And I just highlighted something I didn't want to, so I'm going to switch back to my default, which is object mode. Okay, so right now I am in object mode, which means I am working on my entire object. If I hold my right mouse button down and I switch to edge mode, what that means is now I can work on a single edge. So I could take that edge and I could move that edge, and you could see how that drags that particular edge out. Okay, undo that. So that is edge mode. And I can select multiple edges as well. We'll come back to that in a bit. And if I hold my right mouse button down, select vertex mode. So these are now my vertices. Vertices, plural, vertex, singular. So again, I can select a vertex, and I can move an individual vertex. So that allows me a little bit more flexibility. Now, of course, the thing is, if you're doing, notice there are lots and lots of vertices, so how do you manipulate a lot of them all at once? Well, what I can do is I'm just going to click anywhere to deselect. I'm going to just rotate up a little bit here, and I'm going to turn on wireframe mode by pressing 4. Okay, so now with wireframe on, if I want to switch back, I will press 5. With wireframe on, I can see all of my vertices in the front and in the back. And what I'm going to do is hold my left mouse button down, drag a window so I select the ellipse that makes up all of the lower part of my object. So you can see right there that I've selected all of the vertices that are on the lower side of my cylinder. Now, if I use my scale tool, I'm only going to scale just those vertices. I'm going to scale that out, and you'll see I get a wide-based cylinder and a narrow top. So a truncated cone is what we call this. All right. And go back to my selection tool, click. And now I want to go back to object mode. I'm going to right-click on this, go to object mode, because now I'm going to make a copy of this. Now to make a copy is interesting. It involves the move tool and holding the shift key down. As soon as I hold the shift key down, you notice the word clone pops up. So I'm going to drag that down. There's my clone. Drag that down. There's another clone. All right. So there's the base of my rocket. So that's kind of nice. You can do a clone. You can make very, very quick little modifications there. Next thing I want to do is make a porthole in the side. So we're going to add this cylinder here. Drop it right on there. And I'm going to move it out a bit just so I can work on it. And shouldn't be a problem getting it. We're not going to put it back exactly where it was before. I'm going to resize it. Now, what I want to do is I also want to rotate it 90 degrees. So I'm going to hit E, and of course, if I start rotating it, it's really hard to see exactly where 90 degrees is. So what I can do is I can hit J, and I can rotate it in snaps of 15 degrees. And that will rotate it around, so now it's exactly 90 degrees. Now, if that didn't work for you, if you didn't get those object snaps, or if you didn't get that snapping, what might be happening is this. Maya maintains its last state, and sometimes the tools will get reset. Here are all the options for the rotate tool. So I got to this just by double-clicking on the rotate tool over here, and I can see all my options here. Now, it doesn't really matter what all of these things do, but what you want to do typically is to hit Reset Tool. And that goes for a lot of these tools, is that if you leave them in some orientation, you change some aspect of them, and you forget about that, you come back to it later, and suddenly it's not behaving the way it's supposed to, just hit Reset Tool, and that'll go back to the defaults. Okay, anyways, so there's my cylinder there. So I'm going to take that now, I'm going to move that in to my rocket, and what I want is something like this. Okay, so I've got a porthole in the side of my rocket. I'm going to make sure it's right inside there, indented, and I can press 4 to turn on wireframe, so you can see that part of the cylinder is inside of the rocket and part of it's outside. To turn wireframe off, I'm going to press 5 again. So 5 and 4 will switch between shaded mode and wireframe. There is a rendered mode, but we tend not to work on that. Easier to work on shaded mode. So what I'd like to do now is I'm going to put some detail onto this object. I'm going to do the same thing as I did with the veins at the back. I'm going to turn on edge mode, and I'm going to change my edges. But before I do that, what I'd like to do is I'd like to modify this cylinder a bit so I can have more vertices. And to do that, I'm going to go up over here, in the upper right-hand corner, and I'm going to look for the attribute editor. Now, as soon as I turn the attribute editor on, now I can see that I've got this. Now, this is cylinder number 4, but technically it's also called polycylinder 1. There's a strange naming convention. It has to do with how many times you've cloned things. It's kind of hard to keep track of. Now, what I want to do with that is take a look at its history. So once I created it, I can now go and change what are called these subdivisions. And you notice that when it was created, it has a certain number of edges and a certain number of faces here. Well, I can change that by changing these numbers over here. So I'm going to change the subdivision caps. I'm going to set that to 5. And notice now I get more of these edges here. If I change the axis, you'll see I get a different number of axes, turn it from a circle into more of a hexagon, or I think I'm going to leave that at its original default. I can change the number of heights too, so you can see I can increase the number of vertices. And depending on what you're modifying, that'll show up a little bit later. Okay, I'm going to close my attribute editor now. Now, when you are looking for the attributes, again, you want to look for polycylinder, and then there'll be a number at the end. And that'll be the object that you've selected. Okay, so there we go. All right. So the next thing I want to do is I want to work on these edges right here. So I've got my object selected. I'm going to right click on it and I'm going to go into edge mode. So edge mode allows me to work on the edges. So I'm going to select this edge. Now the thing is, I don't want to select one edge. I want to select a whole ring of edges. Maya is smart enough to know that if you double click on an edge, it will select all the connected edges in a ring. That's kind of nice. I'm going to go ahead and scale that outwards. And same thing with this one. And I'm going to take this ring, switch to my move tool. I'm going to move that in a bit, and you can see what I'm doing here is I'm creating kind of a ring around the outside. And same thing here, I can create kind of a outdent. Okay. So you can see that what I'm doing here is I'm sculpting the shape of my porthole. So something like this. If I want to select two rings, I can double click on this, hold the shift key down, double click on this, and now I've got both rings selected. So I can drag that out a bit, make that a little bit bigger if I want. So there's a bit of sculpting there. So that creates this nice kind of a porthole look. So that's working in edge mode. I'm going to right click, switch back to object mode. And I'm going to select my object here. I'm going to press I'm going to press W for move. And I'm going to hold the shift key down, move it up, and clone it. And then going to rotate it so it is more or less parallel with the hull of the ship. And resize the whole thing. And resize it in 3D. You want to make it a little bit smaller. So something like that. So there's my start of the rocket. Okay. And next section we're going to add a nose cone. Show you how to do some soft editing, which allows you to cascade sort of your motion up the point, and also add in some fins where we can bend and twist some polygons.